Welcome everyone to the Distilled Spirits Council Ask the Expert webinar series. I am Ross Mulcairn, Director of Member Services and Business Development here at the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States, better known as DISCUS. Today's topic here is Behind the Label, what whiskey drinkers value versus how distilleries deliver, with our friends from Proof 8 and Whiskey with a View. We are recording this webinar so that it will be available in the Discus member portal as well as on our YouTube channel. If anyone does not have access to that member portal or YouTube channel, please let us know. You should be able to see all of those. For those of you who are not as familiar, Discus is the leading voice and advocate for our members and the distilled spirits industry here in the United States. Discus provides a wealth of resources and services, including this webinar series that aims to educate and share relevant trends, ideas, resources, discussions, and opportunities. All of our upcoming webinars are listed at distilledspirits.org/events. Please be sure to check in Thursdays at 1 p.m. Eastern for future Ask for webinars. We actually have another webinar that is in 2 weeks from right now with our friends from Eastman Chemical Company that we encourage you all to attend. At some point today, we will be dropping the registration link into the chat. And again, you can check distilledspirits.org/events for all of our upcoming webinars. If you're interested in learning more about Discus and the educational opportunities we have, please email membership@distilledspirits.org. If you're already a fan of all of our offerings and educational opportunities and you want more, we are 4 weeks and 1 day right now away from the end of early bird pricing for the Discus conference in 2026 in Louisville, Kentucky. So please reach out to secure your ticket, your exhibitor booth, sponsorship opportunities while they are still available. We would love to see all of your smiling faces there in Louisville in March. Now, I want to welcome our speakers, our experts today, both experts in the whiskey field, but from 2 different angles. So I'll start with Stuart Maxwell, the COO at Proof 8, bringing over a decade of experience, William Grant & Sons in Scotland, where he mastered everything from technical innovation to maturation. He is now focused on developing digital solutions for American distilleries. And we also have Nate Woodruff, who has spent 14 years working with whiskey brands worldwide and the last 6 as a brand ambassador for companies like William Grant & Sons, Michter's, and Whistlepig. He now reviews and writes about hundreds of whiskeys from his mountain home at Whiskey with a View, giving an authentic consumer perspective. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us, Ross. Looking forward to it.
Thanks,
yeah,
guys.
thank you for having us. I like your description of my home. That was good.
It is beautiful, and I will say, for anyone who has not checked out Whiskey with a View, the view cannot be more underrated. It is beautiful. So welcome, Nate. So for those of you who this is your first Ask the Expert webinar, our experts and I will talk for about 40 minutes. We will take our questions throughout. We have a Q&A function. We also have a chat box. If you have any questions, please feel free to submit those. We will take them and we will ask the questions as we go. But then we will save some time at the end of the conversation just for Q&A if anyone has anything at the end that hopefully sparks interest. Next week, we will send everyone in here a link to this webinar recording for those who registered and attended. And so you all can watch back and see what you might have missed for those of you who aren't taking as curious of notes. Now, we like to keep these things relatively engaged and engaging. So I hope you guys are all ready to be participating and ask questions so that our experts can answer the questions that you guys have. And one thing that I know we want to talk about a little bit today, and if anyone is in here wants to throw like a thumbs up in the chat or something to let us know, if any of you have ever had sort of to change a production schedule or change something in your production based on your consumer feedback or reviews, or if you've had to wish that you could explain to a consumer why you can't change something based on what they have to say. That's sort of something that we're hoping to touch on here. So if you guys have experienced that or had that issue, please let us know. We'd love to hear from you guys in the chat. And I guess while we hear from that and while we wait for everyone to step in, Stuart and Nate, I know this is something that you guys have talked a lot about and thought a lot about. Where do you think the sort of disconnect between production reality and consumer perhaps perception happens so often for our whiskey consumers and producers?
Oh, I mean, for me, the marketing narrative quite often simplifies complex production decisions. Marketing's there to tell a story. It's there to romanticize the product. It's there to entice the consumer and bring them into the fold. But the production reality is most of the time not pretty behind the scenes. Obviously, quite a lot of distilleries have very public-facing parts to them, and they all look very pretty and shiny, copper stills, the likes. But the hard reality is the production is hard. It's hard going. There's hard yards. It's long hours. Often involves quite a lot of complex, hard, difficult decisions. And um, as much as that disconnect is there, I don't necessarily think it's a massive disadvantage. Indeed, I think a lot of the production that takes place, there's quite a lot of different nuances to each site that can entice the consumer in, and it's great that distilleries can showcase that. But the disconnect there is partly, a lot of consumers are not familiar with how things are made. And what I mean by that is, my wife, pits up with me talking about whiskey all the time. But if I told her that Scottish, Irish, bourbon, and Indian whiskies were all made completely differently, she wouldn't have an idea. She would have none the wiser. So that's just kind of my view on it. I don't know what you think, Nate.
No, I agree. My girlfriend also, that's like when she talks to me about baking. I have no idea what she's talking about. I just know it tastes good. So I feel you 100% on that. But yeah, I think it's fascinating. Once you've been in the belly of the beast, as it were, and been in a distillery and seen the inner workings and the nitty gritty, you gain such a larger appreciation. And as someone who likes to work on the marketing and show that aspect of production, and I hope to actually show it more in the future. But as a guy that's more of a marketing and creative person rather than a production person, I think that story is so important to be told, and it's something that has kind of been relegated to the shadows for so long. I feel like people don't really have an appreciation for the everyday person that's either the cooper or the distiller or someone that's just you got to keep the facility clean. I mean, all of those are integral parts of the process. And if you miss just one aspect of that, I mean, the entire operation is at risk. So I think people are much better educated, more informed nowadays with how that all correlates and works together. But I'm excited for the future because I really think it's going to become a lot more standard issue for consumers to have the desire to see how products are being made rather than just accepting the end result and saying, okay, I have this now, moving on.
Yeah, I agree with that as well, because I think a lot of consumers these days are looking for transparency and authenticity. And where when they follow their favorite brands on Instagram, then it piques their curiosity when they get a look behind the scenes. They look. Every time I go to the distilleries, particularly in Scotland, the copper stills are up and you're standing on gratings, but sometimes you're like looking underneath to see, oh, what's down there? Like, I want to see, what's going on. And when you get a little look behind the scenes, that really does help drive the brand forward.
Amazing. Now, one of the things that I know we've talked about, and you guys both just sort of touched on this, is the last few years as people have gotten more curious and gone on some of these distillery tours, look below the copper stills and all that stuff. Last 5 years or so, there was a massive spirits boom here in the U.S. Obviously, a lot of that was pandemic-related, driven. That's for smarter people than me to discuss all of those nitty-gritty of how that all happened. But Nate, that sort of overlaps with your time as sort of a brand ambassador and a reviewer and all that stuff. What would you say has been sort of the biggest shift in the consumer mindset that you've seen in the last 5 years of what folks are looking for and what they're talking about?
Oh boy. I mean, the landscape has changed drastically since I started. I started when I was 24 years old. So about 13 years ago. And when I started off in this industry working for William Grant, I think there were like 85 licensed operating distilleries creating whiskey in the United States. And I mean, we're over 3,000 now. So it's just, a huge shift in the sense of what's available. And so, I mean, it went from people just really clamoring after the big brands to going after more of a craft or more of a refined whiskey, or a brand that would pay attention to details like entry proof and grains and fermentation time and sweet versus sour mash. So I think people became educated rapidly, and the thirst for different styles of whiskey became more and more apparent. They started popping up on the shelf more, and people just started really gravitating towards that. And not only that, you got to bring a bottle over to a friend's house and say, I have something different. This isn't like your Jim Beam. This is, let's say Peerless, for an example. This is like, it's a Kentucky rye, but it's made in a totally different way than the big brands are. And so I think it tapped into whiskey consumers' team mentality. So you have your favorites and your friend has their favorites, and you can swap or mix and match and agree on a certain brand that you're going to wait outside for a special release for. And it became, a very, very interesting community of sorts, where rather than just becoming consumers, we became part of the fun expansion of this spirits category, which, personally, I absolutely love. I think community is one of the most important things in anything. And the one that's been formed around whiskey or even spirits in general has been pretty miraculous to witness over the past decade and a half.
Amazing. Now, when you talk about people sort of lining up outside the store, ending up on their teams, is there anything in particular that you're finding customers are sort of obsessing over these days that, you might think is maybe not the highest priority for you, or that you think customers maybe should be thinking about something else?
Well, let's stay away from Ambarana finishes. That's my least favorite thing in the world. No, I'm kidding. No, I'm not kidding. I really don't like it. But yeah, sometimes, I mean, it depends. I've seen, or been a part of launches like one of my favorite ones I ever did was the Stranahan Snowflake launch up in Colorado, and people will camp out. They literally have like a festival. They will they'll open up the grounds for camping, like tents, campers. People will be posted up for like 2-3 days. They have tents with food, restrooms, and it's like a whole. I think they call it the Snow Village. I could be incorrect on that, but they just create this whole festival of sorts in November, and it's cold. I mean, in Denver, it's not warm at that point in time, and I think that's a great way of doing it. I know I've done launches in Tennessee, Kentucky, and of course there's the crazy ones, like liquor stores. Even at this point, if there's like dropping Pappy Van Winkle, people will be camped out for 2 days before it comes out. But I think the market is shifting from going after hyped bottles like hyper aged whiskey or bourbon to more of a cult following. Stranahan's would be a prime example of that. I think American single malt in general is actually really exploding at the moment. Obviously, it is. I mean, we actually are a category now, which is incredible. It's something I've really been for many years, and I believe that category has the most, or some of the most potential to explode and to allow for innovation, because you don't have the constraints of using a new oak barrel like you do for American bourbon. So you can really experiment with finishing components, different strains of barley. Obviously, the different climates are going to produce different results. So I think that's the one that people are really, really clamoring towards, rather than say like, the next, I'm not knocking it all, but I'm just saying for a lot of times, like people are just waiting in line for, single barrel 12-year MGP finished in, I don't know, a barrel that held honey or something. So I think that's the category where they're building a rabid fan base. I know I'm a huge fan of American single malt. I've got my favorite distilleries in the country. I think that's really where it's going to start going. I mean, bourbon and rye will always be there, obviously, but I've seen the biggest excitement when it comes to single malt.
Amazing. Now, I appreciate you bringing that up, because as we are getting into this sort of experimentation, people are trying a lot of new things. You're the American single malt category, everyone that is getting exposed to all these different concepts, that sort of then inherently lends to the question of how do you keep track of all the different things that you're trying? How do you make sure that you are still producing the correct, bottle, the correct, experiment, following all that stuff? So, Stuart, I know this is something that you've thought a lot about in terms of sort of designing and I guess redesigning how distilleries are thinking about the data and tracking and making sense of all of the different things that they're experimenting with. What are you seeing in what distilleries have been doing, and sort of what you think that is possibly what they're doing well, what they could change, what they could improve? What are your sort of top elements there.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing, when I speak to distilleries, is there's a genuine shift away from compliance-driven record keeping to insight-driven analytics. So in the past, people bought systems as a means to an end to track production for TTP purposes more often than not. So they just wanted to do the one thing. I want to track this. And this is sort of incidental, and the state of the system was kind of neither here nor there. It just needed to do this one thing. But what we're seeing now is people are clamoring for much, much more. They want insight-driven analytics. They want to be able to understand, how is my production performance going? How's it trending? Do I need to take actions? Do I need to, what do I need to do here? And what data can I get that's a leading indicator rather than a lagging? So doing things like digitally linking casks as they come into the site, collating that information, and then when the cask has been emptied, taking samples, analysing that, linking that to the cask history. And then when this cask is filled again, it's great that you brought up American single malt, Nate, because I think you're right. I think it's going to be a huge category for the US, but with that comes additional complexities in terms of consistency of blends, etc. And having that data to hand is going to be super, super important to have a consistent blend over time. So having systems where you can interrogate it and use the data from it, and not to keep records as it has been in the past for compliance purposes, but to use it to really drive your production forward. Look for efficiency, look for losses, look for consistency. That, I think, is going to be where the big trends are going.
Amazing. Now we actually just, which I appreciate, as you were talking about that, we had a question come in that is, I think, very relevant that I'm hoping that you can speak to. And this is something that, I understand a lot better because I am not in a distillery every day. But when you're talking about that insight-driven analytics and what people are focusing on, what are, to use the terms offered, the sort of metrics or KPIs that these distilleries should be looking at when they're trying to figure out, how do we look for insight-driven analytics? What are they looking for within those numbers?
I think that, I'm not going to teach distilleries to suck eggs here. I think most of them will already have KPIs that they use kind of every single day for mashing performance, fermentation performance, distillation performance. That all is there, and it's all great. And the majority that we speak to use Excel currently just to track that, and they can do some nice graphs and stuff. But where I see the future heading is that the systems will prompt you to take action, so that, what those actions will be will very, very specific to your site. Every site's a little bit different, so the problems that you will encounter will be very much geared towards you and your production processes. But people will want the systems to help them guide them through that. And I firmly believe in time we will have systems where you can ask it a question, almost like an AI driven, what action should I take based on previous actions I have taken? What should I be doing in this circumstance, given these set of parameters I have to add, and the system will help you, interrogate previous historic decisions, historic parameters. Okay, you did this last time, this worked well. Do this next time, and I firmly believe that will be the future. I know there's a can see by my background who I work for just now, but that, I think, will be where systems in the future will be headed.
Amazing. Now, when people are looking at these sort of trackings, at which point, or I guess at what point do we start to worry about, I guess, the consistency of this whole thing, of the sort of batch variation of what are we looking at versus I know some people love the idea of a single barrel because they can get something in it that might be different than the one next to it versus, controlling adding multiple things into one bottle to make sure. Where are we seeing, sort of, I guess, the positives and the negatives for both of you really on this sort of consistency question of character versus control?
For me, the kind of number one, especially for American single malts, is cask variability. So, where I used to work previously in Scotland, we were one of the biggest distilleries by volume. We were filling hundreds of thousands of casks per year, and we didn't buy too much of the work in the way of New York, but the ones we did, we bought from several suppliers, and we did a bit of work where we took samples from these casks and from different suppliers. They're all filled with the same spirit type, the same entry proof, And we got quite different results in terms of the wood extracted from those casks. Different levels of vanillin, different levels of syringaldehyde, different tannin levels, ellagic acid, so on and so forth. And that was quite no, I wouldn't say so much of a shock, but certainly a surprise to an extent. And it just goes to show that even in this circumstance where everything, most variables were kept the same, the only thing that was different was who supplied the new wood. We were seeing variations in terms of wood extractives. So I think it's really important personally to keep right on top of what do we get from this. And if you can't afford to send stuff away for statistical and analysis or chemical analysis, that's totally fine. But accurate records of nosing notes, tasting notes, these will be critical. And systemizing that as well, I think, is critical as well. It's all well and good writing it down, or somebody has it in their head. That won't cut it in years to come. There will be a time where you have to, I took this cask and sorry, sample from this cask, and this is my note. But you digitize that, you put it against the cask, and then in 2 years' time, you go, oh, yes, I can see I took a sample here, and this is what I had, and and then I can link that back to other samples from the same cask type from the same supplier. I think that's going to be really, really important in the future.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I can say, from an American perspective, I mean, obviously we have much less temperate climate than Scotland. And even when I've been in Scotland and tasted sister barrels, I mean, it is crazy. I think there's a little more variation when it comes to hogsheads, obviously. But even with American whiskey, I mean, you can have sister barrels made at the same cooperage at the same time, put in the warehouse right next to each other. And in 4 years, they taste drastically different from each other. So, I mean, organization when it comes to your single barrel programs or however many barrels you're blending per batch. I mean, I personally like more of a hands-on approach where, I don't know what the consensus is. I know people argue about it a lot. I say anything after 30, 35 barrels, you can probably slip in one that you didn't like and it'll taste relatively good. I love anything I'm sure most people watching this already know that small batch is just a marketing term. There's really no definition to it whatsoever. Other than it can't be your highest selling SKU in your portfolio. So, I mean, you can have 7,000 barrels that's a ridiculous number, but it is possible. But when you're doing a smaller, anywhere from 4 to 10, or even let's say 18 to 20 barrels, it's going to be extremely important to know every little detail that you can about those barrels. And if you're able to taste through them prior to that and have tasting notes where you can compare, this one was really front of the palate, this one was really mid to back, and those combined together would create a fuller experience. It's information that is invaluable. And as we witness a rise in master blenders, which I'm very happy to watch and support, I mean, those are artists, those are people, those are basically chefs, but with alcohol. I mean, it is not an easy thing. I've dabbled with blending, on my own or with brands, and it's truly something that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of practice, and any sort of extra help you can get especially when you're using something to organize your data or your tasting notes, it's just an immense relief.
Yeah, I can add one thing to that as well. So, as much as I've talked a lot about the wood, okay, because I've quite a lot of my background. But one other thing that's also important is to track the liquid that's produced that first goes into the barrel, right? So we're all humans, right? So when we're making batches, as much as we try to make consistent batches, we try to keep our processes consistent. Inevitably, there will be a bad batch. Okay, there'll be a sour fermentation that you didn't plan or something along those lines. You've got to do something that's very well enough, you fill it to a cask. Now, being able to track that cask over time and keep track of, okay, how's this progressing? I know I've put it into this cask and normally I expect X, but because this has had an issue during my process, I'm going to maybe expect Y, and how am I going to monitor that over time? I think that is also hugely important when it comes to consistent production.
Of course. And Nate, I love the sort of the comparison there to this blending of a chef or an artist, because so much of whiskey making is an art of all spirits, as they're figuring out what the right recipe is to make sure that they're in the right element. And it is, at least I've found fascinating, sort of the introduction of the scientific element to this artistry of how do you find the right balance You want to find the right tasting notes as they're working together, but making sure that you know which tasting notes are going in, because some of these things are aging for 3, 6, 10, God knows how many years. And it's it would be wonderful if we all had a perfect memory that could keep track of exactly what it went into each barrel and how it tasted every so now on.
Yeah, I mean, back in the day, it's if you think about it, like I said, when it was just the big eight distilleries producing. I mean, you could blend thousands of barrels together as long as you had some semblance of consistency, which when you're using that many barrels at a time is arguably easier. But I think gone are the days of mass. Well, not gone. I mean, mass production will always be a thing. Jack Daniel's always going to sell. Jim Beam's always going to sell. But we're entering a new era where craftsmanship and, as you said, artistry is really becoming something that is valuable, which I'm 100% for. And it is crazy when you have an absolute variance in flavor profiles of different whiskeys that you have aging, and you're able to really pick out individual ones and truly make a small batch product of a smaller amount of barrels. I mean, the amount of flavor profiles you can produce are absolutely incredible, even if you're using distillate from the same distillery.
Amazing. And I know I've had seen many wonderful Discus members are now experimenting with all sorts of wonderful things. So it's been an amazing chance for me to see all these different experimentations and unique sort of artist signatures in how everyone speaks about what they've got going on. But when you're talking about a smaller batch, someone who is maybe on a smaller size distiller trying to work through what they're doing, and they want a little bit of that signature, a little bit of that artistry. They're not batching, maybe 100 barrels into one bottle or something like that. I mean, I guess for both of you and in your experience, what have you seen in terms of when you have sort of, Stuart, you mentioned that bad batch, that everything you're trying to keep it all similar, but then something goes wrong. What's are you seeing is happening there? What are our distilleries coming across? What are they finding as the sort of culprits for that bad batch, and how they can sort of keep track of it and look out for some of those, I guess, wherever went wrong and hope to avoid it the next time?
But yeah, I can take this to start. So it's difficult to say or to pinpoint. These are like these three things you should always look out for, because again, every distillery is slightly different. You may be in a very rural location and consistency of supply is a problem for you. It's hard to get the same grains or whatever it may be. But I mean, very typically, yeah, cask variability, warehouse conditions as well. So I know I'm very aware of how different the climate is. And some brick houses and old warehouses can be, the ventilation might not be great, so there's quite huge variations in temperature. So you're at the top of the warehouse, really, really hot, really fast maturation, obviously high losses as well. Bottom of the warehouse, much colder, slower maturation. And there's even, again, keeping it all variable, just those two factor of placement and temperature within the warehouse can cause variability. So yeah, I mean, distillers have to be really vigilant, and I know most that I speak to are constantly sampling, constantly tasting, constantly looking at. In fact, that's just a kind of hard reality, because controlling these variables sometimes is close to impossible. You just have to keep on track of it. You have to be able to track it. And that's why digitizing, I think, is so important. Where as long as you can track, you're in control, you can take action, and those actions will obviously vary depending on the circumstances.
Yeah, I'd follow suit. I'd say one of the biggest issues that I've talked to friends of mine that work in distilleries right now is definitely grains. I mean, monocrop agriculture is kind of like you're just getting complete, it's just not the same as heirloom. So if you're getting mass produced grains, the quality is going to go down. I know I've worked with plenty of brands that do heirloom, both single malt, bourbon, rye, where they source their grains from local farmers, and there is a absolute difference in flavor when especially on viscosity and oiliness and mouthfeel. It's so different when you're using, let's say, like a red corn or a white corn, compared to just your standard, yellow corn that. And one of the dirty little secrets is a lot of times these grain producers, they have a circuit of distilleries that they hit. Certain distilleries get the best stuff to start, and then there's just this downward chain of who gets what's next. To the guy at the end is or the distillery at the end is just not getting the best of the best. So I think grain is a huge issue, and I think it's something that thankfully a lot of distillers are kind of approaching, knowing that. So I am seeing personally, as someone who reviews whiskey, a lot more people focused on heirloom grains, and I think single malt has always had that, barley strains. But I'm really noticing a lot more with more craft bourbon and rye as well.
Interesting. I have not heard too many people talking about understanding the source of all of their grains. So it's I'm glad that we have more folks who are smarter than I am about all of this stuff that know exactly where this is all coming from. Now, but one of the things that I have heard people talk about when they're sort of looking at a craft bottle or a unique product is sort of the age premium of understanding, this is a 3-year, 6-year, 10-year. Nate, when you're talking to consumers and you're talking about your reviews, how much are consumers really seeing and tasting and understanding the differences between all of those different age levels, especially as, Stuart just mentioned, when a barrel is in a different place in the warehouse, the maturation can change drastically even over that same amount of time with that. How much are consumers sort of focusing on that these days?
It's far more prevalent. I mean, now again, I admit that I'm pretty niche. I'm a nerd. I talk a lot with nerds, so my observations may be skewed, but I know I've seen huge shifts in the market consumer wise for this. Back in the day, of course, it was, going after the unobtainiums, the higher age stated bourbons. And I mean, you could still find like, a 21-year rye whiskey on the shelf for $110 when I started. And, now that's just completely unheard of. But I really do think that people, now that they started realizing that you don't need to have an old whiskey to have a good whiskey, especially in the American market. I know personally, if someone's using the things I look for, low entry proof, a decently long fermentation time. Obviously, you want to have your barrels, the staves, air dried for as long as possible. That's unfortunately getting shorter and shorter as we run out of oak trees. But I think that when you do everything a certain way, like especially low entry proof, I think is one of the biggest and best things that have ever happened to this industry, of going from 125 to a lot of people I see nowadays doing 110, which I think is kind of that sweet spot. Your really good whiskey is coming out, let's say on an average of like 6 to 8 years, is just fantastic stuff. And if you're doing if you're creating a whiskey in that way, like if you use let's say 125 standard, industry standard, arguably that whiskey will be able to age longer with the amount of alcohol content in the barrel. Lower entry proof, you kind of want to get it out of the barrel a little bit earlier, which I'm all for. I mean, I think that the stigma of it has to have a huge age statement to be good has just been completely obliterated, at least for the niche consumers that are going to be purchasing those bottles. And some of my favorite whiskeys right now on my shelf are between I'd say 7 and 10 years old. I think that's kind of the new golden standard for bourbon. And if you're making whiskey, whether it be bourbon, single malt, like, you want it to be ready as soon as possible. Like that's good business. You don't want to have to wait 20 years to dump a barrel and to sell it, because you're broke by then. So I think that's the biggest shift, is definitely age statement, and then followed by attention to detail, whether it be grain, entry proof, fermentation time, etc.
There you go. Now, Stuart, what are you seeing with the distilleries that you're talking to and how they are approaching trying to find this sort of golden age, as Nate is talking about, that they're, obviously each barrel is aged slightly differently based on where it is in the warehouse. What are they looking at, and how are they trying to sort of find that, that perfect taste that, gets everyone, Nate and all of his nerd friends, excited?
No, I think they're a lot of these well, I mean, I speak mostly to distillers that are rather than consumers, and again, the key is about tracking, what over time, how are things. Because I think what's going to become really interesting is that one of my old colleagues, he runs a little newsletter called the Commercial Spirits Intelligence, and they've talked a lot about the increase in stock in American spirits. And I think I agree with Nate. I think the age statement part is going. However, it'd be interesting to see what brands do with this surplus, and do they actually start to do more age statements because they think that that's what consumers want, and that's maybe it is to the uneducated. I don't know, but from a distillery perspective, they will do what they need to do to sell, and if they feel like age statements what's needed, they'll do it, and that's um, it's not needed. It's not needed. I don't think as much as maybe it is in Scotland so much, because I think age statements have been around for much longer time. It's completely ingrained within that part of the industry. Um, Whereas it's not in the same way that it has done in America. Um, but yeah, I'm really curious to see. I don't know what you think, Neil, but what the kind of surplus is going to do to products in the future. Will we see a lot more of the kind of older 12, 15, 18 type whiskies, and is that good for American consumers? I don't know. It's really interesting to see what happens.
Oh yeah, sorry, I may have forgotten to preface. I was speaking strictly for the American market, not Scotland at all. That's very different. Yeah, I mean, right now we are about to enter a complete glut era, as I'm sure most people on this webinar know. The investors got involved, and the investors bought a lot of whiskey, thinking, from what I've spoken to, not all, obviously, many people are making the right business decisions, but a lot of these companies bought whiskey thinking, oh, we're just going to sit on this for 15 years and then we're going to sell it for a super premium, not realizing that you have maybe like a 0.4 chance of a 15-year, 20-year, 23-year barrel being actually good. And so right now they're panicking because they're sitting on barrels. After making these purchases, a lot of them have been educated on, oh, we have like 6 to 8 years to sell this. So right now we have way too many barrels. We have way too much whiskey, which I would argue is never an issue, but if you're a business person, it is. And, I think we're going to see a lot of open market sales of really, really good age-stated whiskey for pennies on the dollar of what it's actually worth, which will be an interesting time because I think a lot of up-and-coming brands are going to, get involved with that and be able to really get some very, very solid, well-made whiskey with a good age statement and, sell it for much cheaper. So we're really so close to watching this super premium bubble bust of, trying to sell a 12-year Kentucky bourbon for $500 a bottle. It's not feasible. I think a great example of that is, as a fan of basically anything Wild Turkey makes, they said they're ending their Masters Keep series, did it on a high note, great bottling. And I think they see the writing on the wall that super or ultra premiumization is just kind of like, it's just not, and especially in today's economy, like it's really hard to justify spending $500 on a 12-year bottle of whiskey where, I think in the next 2 years, seeing a 12-year bottle of bourbon on the shelf for $45, if not less, that's going to kind of be the norm.
Well, I mean, that'll be an interesting change for all of the consumers to have to, change their perceptions of it. Now, we've actually had a couple people talking in the chat, which I'm finding really interesting. So I encourage people to keep talking and bringing us their perspectives, because we've had a lot of conversations about sort of the terroir and the environment in which the ingredients are grown. And we even have a distillery talking about, they're growing their own corn, using their own spring water, using their own wood to sort of control all of those elements on site. Is there anything, obviously we've talked a lot about consistency and character and age, all of that stuff, that I guess for either of you, that you would say you have seen is helpful, even as much as distilleries are trying to control the sourcing and everything of their own, that they can continue to do to say, this is the product that we like, this is the product that we're creating, and how can we make sure that as much as we're trying to control, I mean, if you're growing your own product, if you're growing your own wood, what can you do next to make sure that you are creating a product that whiskey lovers want?
From a marketing perspective, transparency is key. I just know that that is put in all the details, all the details. Like I want to know everything, and I will. Now, again, this is take this with a grain of salt. This is me. I'm a nerd. I want to know all the details, but too much information, as long as you're not doing anything shady, is never going to hurt you, in my opinion. Unless you have some absolutely insane mash bill combination, fermentation time, barrel that just has created the best whiskey in the world. You want to keep that a secret. Totally understand that. But I think people want to be educated. People want to taste something and say, I have something unique. I have something different. I have something that's not run of the mill. And, you know, as I was talking about before with the glut era coming up, I mean, people are going to see a lot of similar products coming out because they were bought or contract distilled en masse. So if you have your own grains and your own spring water and you're using your own oak or, you know, finishing barrels, that's awesome. I mean, that's what I look for. I couldn't even tell you how many brands reach out a year to me to review whiskey. And there are times where I just look at the cheat sheet, if you will, and I just go, I don't have any interest. I know what MGP aged for 2 years tastes like. I'm sorry. Like I want something different. I want you to tell me about your grains. I want you to tell me about, you know, anything from your mash bill to the way it's ground to the way that you're barreling it. Yeah, all that stuff is fantastic. I know it's more expensive. I know it's more time consuming, but that is, in my opinion, the future of whiskey. And if you're able to hold the course, I think it's going to pay off in the end.
I completely echo that. And to be honest, you said that from a marketing perspective, transparency and key. Production's the same. It's just your answer is almost, you could just replace the marketing word with production, and the answer is virtually the same. And it can be more time consuming. It can be a bit more difficult, but there are systems out there where you can literally tap a bottle with an NFC tag, and it'll bring up everything that's gone into that bottle, right down from the mash bill to fermentation time. If a distillery wants to expose that information, then absolutely you can do that, and I agree completely that it's the future of being able to market. It's particularly, I think, the smaller distilleries, craft distilleries, if I can use that term, in a way that allows them to differentiate themselves from the bigger players in a really unique and fun way for consumers. So yeah, I completely would echo that from a production side as well.
Amazing. And we actually had another question come in that I think is relevant to this story that you guys are telling about the transparency element on the marketing side and the production side. Is how are folks using, you know, all this sort of new technologies and opportunities? You know, Stuart, you mentioned that you think we're not far away from being able to ask something like, "Hey, what went wrong with this batch?" or what are all these things? What are the steps that are being taken now? What are the tools that people are using? What are you guys seeing in terms of what folks have access to and what is really driving that transparency and that opportunity?
Fire away, Stuart. This is your wheelhouse. He's the technology guy.
I said this is absolutely not a sales pitch. I said that from the start. You know, a lot of consumers and a lot of distilleries are using systems like our own to track that. So we one of our kind of unique selling points is we use blockchain to track cask ownership, for example. So when it comes to transparency, you know, that is our USP, right? So if you have a cask, we apply a code to that cask. That cask is then you know, it creates a digital ID. That digital ID can then be assigned to you. If you've bought that cash, you own it. It's in your digital wallet. You don't have to worry about parting around bits of paper that prove your ownership. Or, you know, I don't think we had a scandal in Scotland last year where some brokers were caught uh, basically duplicating what we call delivery orders, which were basically the your ownership certificate. So it's the same barrel but multiple delivery orders, and what we're trying to tackle is getting around that, or getting completely away from paper-based ownership systems and digitizing our assets using blockchain technology. So, you know, we have our inventory management system that works really well, and it helps distilleries track things. But the ownership piece, I think, is really, really critical. And And a lot of distilleries rely heavily on cask ownership schemes to generate cash flow, certainly during the early years. They want that to be as secure as possible, and the people that buy it want it to be as secure as possible as well. And that's that and the kind of AI path I talked about earlier in terms of AI generated insights, I think is, that's where people I think are going to go.
On that note too, just for what you were talking about, Ross, about quality standards. If you have a system that is digital and blockchain where you can say you get a barrel and you go, oh man, what went wrong here? Like this is not on par with what we create. If you have a digital system where you can go, okay, well, here are the grains we used, here's the barrel type, the cooperage that made it. If here's the entry proof, here is what the proof is now, here's where it was stored in the warehouse. There could be just a one-off strange thing, or you might be able to find a flaw in your system and be like, okay, this barrel and this barrel and this barrel, they're very similar. What went wrong here? We can take that, we aggregate the information, and we can eliminate that problem. There are always going to be bad barrels. There's just, especially when it comes to American whiskey with the climate, it's just going to happen. You could have leakage. You could have bad oak. It's going to happen. But if you have a comprehensive system detailing every little thing about your barrels, I think that you can make those occurrences lessen.
Hey, we're all looking for a more consistent way to make sure that we can, when we find a problem, the issue is rarely the problem. It's finding what happened and making sure that it doesn't happen again, right? Isn't that? I think I was taught that as a kid, something like that. So as we are looking at this, and I know we're coming up, we got about 10 minutes left. So if anyone has more questions, please drop them in the chat. Please send it into the Q&A. We love hearing from you guys. We want to make sure that this webinar is addressing what you guys all want to hear about, what you guys want to talk about, and helping it out. So I guess one thing that actually we did have come in as we talk about these transparency opportunities, as we're talking about how to market what is in your product and appealing to the nerds. The nerds, we say lovingly, as Nate's crew would say. So one of our distillers is asking if anyone has advice for a distillery launching a new whiskey into their line from a marketing perspective, or from, they're talking about a marketing perspective, but also just in putting out a new product. What would you say to someone who says that we have a distillery up and running, we have whiskey that we're proud of, but we want to put out a new product, both in what is the new product and, how do we market it as something new, but from a distillery that is known and loved?
So it's an established distillery, but it's a new line, you said?
I will say I am making some educated guesses.
Okay. Honestly, at this point, it's very easy to get lost in the noise. So you have to have a product that's going to stand out. That's just there really no if, and, or buts, unless you're a very small distillery with a very loyal local following that will support you. If you're trying to mass produce in any capacity, or even go down the DTC or direct to consumer route of selling online, which I think is brilliant and should be taken advantage of, it's really about standing out. So not only the packaging, I think right now people are hungry for stories. Everything seems very generic, but if you can create an authentic story or a narrative surrounding a release, people, I think, gravitate towards that. I know working, as someone who has been paid to travel and photograph whiskey bottles all over the world, if you find someone with a loyal following and you have a really good product and you get it in their hands, that creates probably the most, in my opinion, effective way of getting your product's voice out there to get known. I know, us nerds are hard to please, but a lot of people like following us because we, one, don't sugarcoat it. I get sent bottles every year that I don't like. I don't post them or review them, but I will reach out privately to the brands that send them to me and be like, hey, this wasn't for me. If you want me to go on a long-winded speech of why I didn't like it and what I would do differently, I will. If you want me to just be quiet, I will be quiet, but it just wasn't for me. And I think that's kind of a great way to, and extremely cheap way to test out your bottles, is to find people that have a good following, that are just truly nerdy. And, some charge, some don't, but it's a lot cheaper than running social media ads, I can tell you that. And you just say, hey, give me your honest opinion. And if you have a good product, I mean, chances are, I mean, nowadays I barely take any money to do photo shoots. I just do it purely for the love of the game. I get sent bottles. They're brands that I have reviewed multiple times, just because I absolutely love how transparent and how good their product is. And if you're coming out with a new product that you truly believe in and you think is exceptional, reach out to some people. Get the feelers. I think a lot of people are hesitant and scared to just ask people what their opinion on something is, and instead they just go right to market and launch something. A lot of nerds, quote unquote, even if they aren't in the industry per se, they may have more knowledge than someone that works full time for a facility. You never know. So I think that would be my advice, is before launching, kind of like test the waters a little bit. See, put an embargo on your product and be like, please don't say anything until this date. I know a lot of distilleries have done that with me. And I think that's honestly kind of like the sneakier way, if you will, to figure out how well your product's going to do before you actually go for a full launch.
One thing I completely agree with that. One thing I'd say as well is you can tell lots and lots of people, but you won't be able to tell everyone. So we shouldn't really underestimate the value of great packaging. It's a bit of an unsung hero of the industry. Bottles, labels, corks, capsules. They're not as sexy as the liquid in the bottle itself, but people buy with their eyes. Yeah, if you've got a bottle that stands out in the shelf, people will be immediately drawn to it. And they go, "What's that? Oh, that's stuff. I've never seen a bottle like that before. I've never seen a label like that before. I've never seen packaging like that before." And you will immediately gain an interest. Even if they don't buy it, at least they'll see it. They might remember it. They might come back to it next time. They go, "I might try that next time. I remember that was a really unique design, a really unique bottle again." Again, this is a bit of a Scotch example here, but there was just an auction last month. It's called Distillers One of One. You might have seen it, raised millions of pounds for charity. But each of those bottles, the packaging was just absolutely exceptional. But it was one of one, so they could be exceptional. They could be different. I would highly, if you haven't seen it, please do have a look at it. Some of the bottles were really quite spectacular. Obviously, these are one of one, and you're looking at mass produced or kind of bulk selling these products, but do not underestimate the value of good packaging when you're bringing out a new line or a new brand.
I agree. Once you get a consumer to, obviously, I'm more, I'm more interested in the liquid inside. I've seen absolutely horrifically designed bottles that have amazing liquid in it. I don't recommend going that route, but it has happened. But I mean, from a sales perspective, once you get a customer to pick your bottle up off the shelf, you've done about, I would say, 50% of the work. If that's the first thing they reach for at a liquor store, or the first thing they notice at a bar, I mean, you've done half the legwork right there. So it is absolutely important.
Amazing. Now, we actually did get a question, and Nate, I don't know if this is something that I think might be a little more focused towards you. When people are talking about smaller sizes to get attention, get someone to pick their bottle up off the shelf, are folks utilizing sampling packs or bundles or something smaller than a 750 mil just to get maybe lower that barrier to entry?
Yeah, some are. I would say, well, one, there is an absolute transition from 750 to 700 milliliter. That's definitely for international purposes. You're also saving a little bit of liquid. I'm totally fine with that. I mean, if you're going to export to Europe or Asia and you have to fall under those standards, there's no reason not to have that. I've noticed a lot of special releases have shifted to 700 over 750, while the core SKUs stay at 750. And 375s are really becoming a thing, and it's something I do actually enjoy seeing. A lot of them, like Bardstown comes to mind. Their special releases, they've started doing in 375s. I love that because, it encourages people to actually open more of them rather than just sit on the full bottles. 50 mLs, I mean, I'm torn on those. I think they're cool, the minis, but they end up costing generally more just for bottling, and packaging and whatnot. But I think 375s for special releases, if you have a loyal following and you have a really good product and you can make it kind of like a distillery only or an extremely limited DTC product, yeah, I think it's actually something we're going to see more and more of. And I'm all for it, honestly.
Amazing. Now, I know we're coming up on time, so I just got a couple more questions that I want to run by you guys. Sort of before we get to sort of our closers, Stuart, one of the things that we've talked a lot about is sort of utilizing the technology for tracking, for understanding what's going in barrels, to be able to use that transparency in your marketing. What are some of the, obviously, I know you said earlier you don't want to tell a distillery what they should be doing because they're obviously the artists, but are there any specific metrics or numbers that you found that are most helpful for distilleries when they're tracking what's going into their products?
So from going into raw materials, do you mean, or
Just before it gets to the bottle, I guess wherever along that line that they are finding is a most helpful thing that they should be looking out for.
I mean, so honestly, I mean, given chemical analysis is expensive, I know, but tracking wood extractives, tracking proof over time, tracking losses if you can, tracking all these things are great. But I don't really think much beats the nose. If you've got a great master blender, or you've got a great blender on site or in your team, just constant sample nose, sample nose, sample nose record, sample nose record. You'll just keep doing that and keep. As much as that it feels like it's an old school method, it works. There's just no two ways about it. It's just one of those things that I think will be forever part of our industry. Is that you almost can't put a price on a great blender who's got a fantastic nose, who can pick out the subtleties of your product as it's maturing. But I think the recording of that is going to be and then using that data to make informed decisions on, should I be releasing a single cast, or should we make this and put this into that blend? And I think that's what, if there's going to be one thing you would do, that's the one thing I would absolutely recommend. Just keep doing that as much as you can.
Absolutely. And I know we're at 1:59, so we got 1 minute left. Stuart, that was wonderful. Nate, do you have any big takeaways for our distillers here that they should be after they've tuned in and learned so much? What are they bringing back to their production floor for what the consumers are looking for these days?
Like I said, I mean, it's, as someone who's more of a marketing creative, I am knowledgeable when it comes to production, but I don't consider myself an expert, but I do understand what goes into the bottle and the processes that make it good. So, honestly, I think we're in for a real wild couple years. My biggest recommendation would be try to stand out as much as possible when it comes to marketing if you aren't producing your own liquid. If you're producing your own liquid, please, please, please keep in mind that you're probably going to be overpriced in the next 2 years when it comes to premium expressions. I don't think that you're going to be able to put a 5-year bourbon on the shelf for $150 and sell it anymore. I think that is coming to a close. So please keep that in mind when you are launching your premium products, that price them appropriately, because otherwise you're going to be gathering dust on the shelf over the next 5 years. So that would be my recommendation.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for your time. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. We appreciate you guys giving us an hour. We hope to see you guys in 2 weeks when we have our next Ask the Expert webinar. If you have any questions for our experts or for the Discus team, please do not hesitate to reach out to us, membership@distilledspirits.org. If you have any follow-up questions for our experts, again, send us an email. We're happy to connect you with either Stuart or Nate to get everyone together. We are always looking for a smarter and stronger and more efficient American spirits industry. So I would like to say thank you to everyone who is here. We will see you at our next Ask the Experts, and you guys can all go ahead and log off. Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks. Cheers.